Welcome, everybody. My name is Marty Mascari. I'm with the North Central Texas Area Agency on Aging. I want to welcome you all on this, at least for us in North Texas, very, very cold, icy morning. I hope you all are staying home and staying safe. Again, we're very fortunate to have Haiman+Hogue here to partner with us on this incredible series we've worked together on for, getting close to a year, I think now, but we really appreciate it. It's just really been exceptional. But Sheila Williamson is here, and I'm going to let Sheila talk about especially since we have ethics CEUs today. If Sheila, will you talk about the ethics, the process of getting the CEUs?
Yes, it's very simple for those of you that this is your first time, and I know there are some first timers on here. All you do is either you have two choices. Either email me directly at sheila@hayman+hogue.com, which is in the screen that you see there now, and tell me that you need the CEU information. I will then send you a sign-in sheet and an eval, and probably a conflict of interest form too, because the conflict of interest form you do need, because this technically we're an elder law and estate planning firm, so we handle things that, as a living, that this might entail. However, this is strictly educational only. This is why we do this. That's our primary core value, and this is why we do it. So we want you to get credit. You simply email me, let me know this. I will send you the two forms. You fill them out, scan them back to me, and I will send you your CEU, your certificate. Now, your other choice is to wait until Marty sends you the follow-up, and he will have the forms in there because I'm sending them to him today. So he will have the forms in there to send to you. So you either way, whether you email me directly or you wait for that, then you will fill them out, scan them to me, and then I will send you your certificate.
In addition to the CEU survey, we also have a survey that we have to, an evaluation survey that we have to collect for our funding sources. And so as you get off today, as you close out, you should see a pop-up of a survey, a Google survey to fill out. I know some of the companies that you guys work with have those kind of things blocked, so it may not pop up. For most people, I know it does because I get usually a big number right after we close out. But I will also include a link to that survey in our follow-up email with the of all of the CEU information as well. And again, the two links for the for both the PowerPoint slides and for the case studies that they're going to use today. So Sheila, do you want to introduce Fred, even though it says that he's Sheila?
Yes. Yes. I want to introduce to you my boss, Fred Hayman, who is the founding partner of Haiman+Hogue, the law firm that I mentioned to you earlier. We do estate planning and elder law only. So he has 25 years experience as an attorney. He has quite the story, which I'm sure will come out in this in the webinar. But our primary core value at Haiman+Hogue is education. And so he and I strive to educate as many of our professionals as we can. We know you have to have these. And so we try to make them as easy for you as possible. If we can help you in any way with any of this, because Fred has a vast experience, not only in the law, but he was a police officer before that. So he has a tremendous experience that can help with some of these ethical issues that can come up. But ethics, as you know, is by the book, and it is strictly laws type of situation. So Fred is the perfect person to do that. He is the founding partner of Haiman+Hogue, and he is just very personable and will make it enjoyable for you, as enjoyable as an ethics course can be. Okay, without any further ado, here's my boss, Fred Hayman.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. I appreciate that, because I think if we were able to see everybody and I was to ask you how many of y'all really want to be at this class, there wouldn't be very many hands, because most of us don't just jump for joy to go to an ethics training. but it's absolutely necessary. And I know as far as my state bar license, I have to have 3 hours of ethics every year. I'm not sure exactly what each one of your all's requirements are, but ethics is a mandatory requirement of training that we usually don't like to go to, but we have to. But it's one of those areas of training that almost, when I first started looking into it, I thought, this is stuff that shouldn't have to be taught because it should be just natural for us to all want to do the right thing. And most of us do that choose a line of work to help people, first responders or healthcare workers or any of the areas that we're working in. Most of us are very open to wanting to do this for the right reason, not for the money, because I was a police officer for many years. I worked for the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement outside of law school, that is the agency that oversees police officers and their licenses. And most people that get in these lines of work do it for other reasons other than money. But the sad part is that ethic rules are written to where they're not always cut and dry, and they're not always just do the right thing. There are things that come into play. And so at the end of this, I'm going to ask some of you all to join in and share with me some ethical dilemmas that you might have found yourself in. And it's throughout the presentation, if you want to type some of that in so that we can talk about it at the end. I'd rather do that than cover case studies that I've done in the past, because I know that there are ethical dilemmas popping up today that aren't your usual ethical dilemmas, because most of us know, the patient nurse ratio ethical problem, and too many patients, not enough nurses, too many patients, not enough staff or CNA or anybody else. We all go through those kind of things, but there are some different ones now because of COVID and everything that we're going through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through the two biggest code rule areas that apply to most of you all, and that's in the nursing and the social work ethics area. As you notice as we go through it, though, they're pretty much the same. Pretty much every occupation has ethical rules, ethical codes, ethical guidelines in the same general areas. First one, we'll talk a little bit about the nursing ethics. These are the central morals, duties, and commitments for nurses to do their practice. That falls under the Nurse Practice Act, which is Chapter 301 of the Texas Occupation Code. I know that you guys read that all the time, but those wonderful big law books that we have that have all these rules in them. But under that code, that gives power to the nurse of the Nurse Practicing Act and power to the Texas Board of Nursing to oversee licensing regulation of the nurse practice. The Texas Administration Code contains rules that determine by nursing. This contains specific information on licensing, peer assistance, minimum acceptable levels of nursing. It establishes the Board of Nursing, and it ensures safe nursing practices are followed throughout the state. Every state has their own rules and ethical guidelines when it comes to this. It gives the mission of the Texas Board of Nursing to protect and promote the welfare of the people of Texas by ensuring that each person holding a license as a nurse in the state of Texas is competent to practice safely. Now, if you really look at that mission statement, it is so broad that it's really hard to say what exactly does that mean? What exactly is competent? What exactly is safe practices? So a lot of these things I find in these areas are a little vague in areas, which gives the Texas Board of Nursing a lot of discretion in what they find to be competent and not competent, what they find to be safe practices and not safe practices. So it gives them a lot of open area to discipline. If you all are like me, I've found myself in positions throughout my career that said, just let me do my job. There's so many rules, there's so many regulations that I just can't even do my job without worrying about losing my license if something goes wrong, even if I didn't intentionally want it to go wrong. But unfortunately, the way the ethical guidelines are written, that opens the door for that type of thing. The guidelines, the training, this is one of the goofiest training rules I've ever heard. It says a licensed person that holds a license as a nurse must have at least 2 hours of continuing education relating to nursing jurisprudence, which is ethics and nursing ethics, before the end of every third 2-year licensing period. Now, where they came up with that end of third every 2-year license period is beyond me, but I'm sure there are some of you all out there that have had problems with figuring out what exactly is that and when is my time up, and make sure that I don't go past that weird arbitrary third 2-year license period without having the proper training. But that gives you an idea of how convoluted sometimes these laws are written, and I'm sure that the lawmakers that write them think they're easy to understand, but they're really not when it comes to actually practicing. So important statutes that pertain to nurses are Chapter 302, 304, and 53 of the Texas Occupational Code. That sets up the nursing peer review, the licensure aspects, and the consequences of criminal convictions. As with every license, a criminal conviction that is completely not related to your license whatsoever can jeopardize your license. So the Texas Government's Code Chapter 411 establishes the Department of Public Safety's ability to access criminal histories by the Texas Board of Nursing. Having trouble talking this morning. So the Texas Board of Nursing has the ability to access the DPS records to do a criminal history check when it comes to 3 different areas: application process, eligibility process, and investigation process. So whenever you're applying, they can pull your records whenever they're determining whether you're eligible, and if there is an investigation launched because of a complaint or a formal charge against you, they can access your criminal records. And I've seen cases. I worked for a law firm in El Paso many years ago. My first 10 years of practicing law, I was a litigator. And in one of the law firms I worked for a while, we had a nurse lawyer in the office, and she did a lot of this work representing nurses that were in these investigations and stuff. And I have seen situations where a nurse was investigated for something and terminated for a criminal record completely unrelated to what the investigation started as. So that is, you got to keep your nose clean on the job and off the job. Texas Administration Code 217 defines unprofessional conduct, unprofessional or dishonorable behavior of a nurse that the board believes. I like that term, board believes. That shows that they have a lot of discretion. They believes are likely to deceive, defraud, or injure clients or the public. So it's a very broad definition of unprofessional conduct, and they can fit a lot of things into it that they want to fit into it. So the code of ethics for nursing is not as much law as we've just gone over, but it is guidelines. It establishes the American Nursing Association. This code of ethics was developed, as it says right there, as a guide. These are not cut and dry rules. You either violate them or you don't violate them. These are guidelines on how to engage in proper behavior on the job. The Texas State Board of Social Workers. So let's switch gears a little bit over to the social worker area, but you're going to see as we go through even the social workers, it's almost exactly the same. They mirror a lot of the same things. All licensed social workers must observe and comply to the codes of conduct and standards of practice. Any violation of the conduct or standard of practice will constitute unethical conduct or conduct that discredits or tends to discredit the profession. That's what they're looking for if they're going to look at possibly pulling your license. you cannot these are some of the things that it lists in there that are violations, is you cannot discriminate. Now, the one thing that is a definite license issue is any federally protected class. So I did employment law for about 4 years of my practice. I represented a lot of people that were suing their employers for discrimination and other things. And I had to tell my clients many, many times that
I think we've lost Fred's signal here. Hold on.
is a rather recent area is sexual preference. Sexual preference only came around in about the last 10 years. So these certain federally protected areas are the ones that are the guidelines. Now, anything outside of that can be found to be violation under the code, and it can lead to licensing. But if you violate one of the federally protected areas, you can almost guarantee you're going to lose your license. You shall always have your credentials and qualifications. And I think you all probably live that every day and don't even think about it. You carry your badge on you. That every hospital I ever go to, my mom is now in a nursing facility, and every time I go up there, all of the people that work there have tags hanging from their belt or around their neck to show their credentials. You can only provide services within your professional competency. Now, this becomes a gray area because, as you all know, a social worker is not a social worker is not a social worker, just like an attorney is not an attorney is not an attorney. If somebody called me and asked me to do their divorce and I did it, I would be acting outside of my professional competency because I'm not a divorce lawyer. I haven't practiced law in family law. And same thing with social workers and nurses and licensed therapists. You have to be practicing in the area that you either specialize or you are trained in, and it cannot act outside of that area. Shall maintain and improve professional knowledge and skills. You got to stay up on the rules and the regulations and the laws. I call that a lifelong learner. You've got to be a lifelong learner. You've got to always be bettering yourself in the education area. The one constant in our occupations is change. There's always new things coming about that we need to know about. The services provided must be based on assessments and diagnosis of the client. They can't just be random. They shall safeguard the client and keep them confident, the confidentiality issue. Maintain professional boundaries. I love that we have to add in there, shall not have sexual contact with the client. That's one of those rules that should never even have to be written, but it is. And they have to put it in there so that they have a way to enforce when that horribly unethical behavior takes place. You shall refrain from providing services while impaired. And that, people think of that as drugs and alcohol, but there can be other issues, that physical health, wellness. I've had people get into ethical dilemmas because they were severely sick, and the boss is demanding that they come to work because they're shorthanded, and you're like, I'm not well. I could subject people to whatever I've got. My mind is not working right because I'm just not feeling well. That under the guidelines says that you're not supposed to be working if your physical or mental health it can jeopardize your judgment. You shall not exploit your position, taking advantage of your position in any way, shape, or form. Shall evaluate on the basis of, shall evaluate the progress on a continuing basis. So you've got to keep up with the clients. That's one of the complaints that we hear with assisted living, nursing care facilities, elder care areas, is that they don't continue evaluating the progress of the person, that they, unless there's a family member that's on top of it to make sure they're doing their job, that these elderly get forgotten and left in their rooms for days with minimum, care, and there's not any, the care is substandard. You shall refer to a client to those services as social worker is unable to meet. So you have to decide, is this something beyond my ability? If so, I need to refer them out to another person or another agency or another area so that they can get the care that they need. So the code of ethics for social workers, you are to help people in need and address social problems, challenge social injustices. That's a real hard one because a lot of times people want to stand up for what is wrong and what maybe your agency is doing wrong, or a facility, a community is doing wrong, and you're disciplined or something happens because of that. But your code says that if there's things going on that are not right, you have the requirement to challenge these social injustices of things that are not being done properly. You respect the dignity and worth of a person, respect the importance of human relationships, be trustworthy, maintain your areas of competence and professional expertise. Now, if you look at this list, it all is one of those, to me, lists. So okay, that makes sense. It all is pretty much common sense that you shouldn't have to be told, but we know that in our line of work, these are the things that we're supposed to do. So then there's ethical standards. There's ethical conduct, and then there's ethical standards. And again, the standards are really your guidelines. The social work area has a very detailed ethical standard guidelines, these code of ethics that outline them. There's really 3 sections, but I'm going to go over the first one that really just deals mainly with clients. You must have a commitment to your client. You got to take care of them. Self-determination and respect and promote the right for clients to self-determine. What does that mean? The client has to have a say-so in what you're doing with them. You cannot just say that, oh, this client, their mind's not right, and I'm not going to listen to what they have to say because I'm right and I know what I'm doing. The client and the patient has to have input into how their care is being done. Informed consent, you have to, if the person is able and mentally, physically able to give consent, you have to obtain consent. If not, you have to obtain it from a agent under power of attorney or somebody else that has the authority to give consent. Competence, you respect themselves as competent only within the boundaries of their education licensing. Again, you have to work in the area that you know what you're doing. You cannot work outside of areas that you're not trained in or not keeping up to speed. Cultural awareness and social diversity, we have to be aware of the differences between people. This is a heightened thing right now with everything that's going on, but one of the best classes I ever took as a police officer was cultural awareness. And it was I think a 2-day seminar that we had to go through to really start thinking about how not how one race or one gender or whatever is better. It's what are the differences. We are all different. So are there certain things within certain cultures that you need to be aware of so that you don't offend people, so that you don't do something you shouldn't? I remember being involved in a case as a police officer where I went to a family fight, and the guy answered the door. I could hear yelling and screaming behind him. I looked over his shoulder, and it looked like there was about some violence about to occur. I stormed past the guy into the house, and I almost started the biggest family fight against me that I've ever been involved in, and had to call for backup. And I think what it all came down to is this was an Asian family, and I disrespected their house by storming into their house, especially without taking my shoes off. And that is a huge cultural no-no, and it caused me more problems in trying to handle that situation than if I would have been aware of it and thought about it before I just barged into the house to try to take control of it like a lot of police officers do. So we have to be aware of the differences between people. Conflicts of interest, we all hear that every day. You cannot be engaged in things that are a conflict of interest. One of the things we have to do when we do these training is advise you all. I do this for a living. I'm an attorney, and I get paid to represent people in elder law and estate planning areas. and therefore I'm not giving this training to try to wrangle up business. That would be a conflict of interest. We do this training basically to educate people and give them the information that we hope that they can use and to be a resource for people in the future. Privacy and confidentiality, we all know about that. That is a big thing that's kind of hammered all the time. You've got to keep things confidential. And that includes talking to family members and all about your job. And we all get into those situations because we get home and what'd you do today and tell me about your day. And sometimes you have to say, I can't, there's certain things that happen today I cannot talk about because I can't breach that privacy and confidentiality agreement that I have with my patients. Clients need to have access to their records, or client families that have authorization. Again, this 1.09 of sexual relations, you can't have sexual relations with your patients or clients. That is a huge no-no, and that, as you can see, that paragraph's longer than almost any of the other paragraphs because there's been multiple problems in those areas. The physical contact one is difficult because when you get close with your patients and you're working with people, I know that I'm a hugger. I love to hug people, and I like to show my compassion that I care for people. Sometimes you got to watch that. I remember I'm a dad, and I've had 2 teenage daughters, and it's not uncommon for me to put my hand on their shoulder when I'm talking to them and say, whatever it is. I remember that at one time we had an intern in our office, and I walked by her one day and put my hand on her shoulder and said, "Hey, how you doing today?" And I walked on, and it offended her, and I didn't even think about it. It wasn't even intended. There wasn't any thing inappropriate whatsoever, but it offended that person. So you need to know who is and isn't offended by physical contact of any shape or form, not inappropriate physical contact, but any physical contact whatsoever. Sexual harassment has always been a big issue, and it's been a big issue for years. I had many cases when I was doing employment law involving sexual harassment. Again, you got to remember it is in not just your common sense ones of touching and all that stuff, but it also is verbal or written, electronic, anything of the nature of sexual in nature can be offensive. I had a big case at one point that I had an employee of a Bank of America who was wanting to sue her employer because she had a boss that would come in and explain in graphic detail her sexual exploits. And it was a lady boss and a lady employee, and she was very offended by it. And so we filed a lawsuit. We get to court, and their defense wasn't that this boss had not done what we said she did. Their defense was that she was an equal opportunity harasser, meaning that she told these sexual things to both men and women, and therefore she was not discriminating against it, and it was not sexual harassment because it wasn't directed at a certain sex, a certain gender. And they won because the rules at the time, I don't know what they are today, but at the time, the laws were written that if you were an equal opportunity harasser, you weren't violating the law. And even they said her actions may have been extremely inappropriate, but they weren't illegal. And I was truly blown away. But those are the things that you come up with in the legal aspect of this. But in the workplace aspect is just don't talk about it, don't refer to it, don't have anything to do with it while on the job around your coworkers, around your patients. Same thing as derogatory language. You can't be cussing and talking around the workplace like maybe you do at the bar after work or around friends. You've got to maintain proper language and not offend people. You should ensure that the fees are fair, payment of services. Clients who lack decision-making ability, you need to take responsible steps to safeguard their interests for those that cannot make their own decisions. And interruption of services. If there's this issue that comes up where you can't continue taking care of this, you need to do whatever you can as soon as possible to make sure they're taken care of by somebody else. and referral. There is a guideline that says if you can't take care of this person, you have an obligation to refer them over to somebody who can take care of them. And this is a really long one that does come into issues quite a bit, is termination of services. How can, and I know we find it in the legal area, can I fire my client? If I have a client that's a difficult client and not working with me, can I fire them? And if so, how do I have to go about it? It's the same thing with terminating services with a patient, is can you terminate those services? Is it going to be to their detriment? If it's not going to be to their detriment, then yes, can you terminate them because they didn't pay in certain circumstances? Yes. Same thing within our legal area. I used to be, when I was a trial lawyer, I requested to be withdrawn as counsel because a client wouldn't pay me, and the judge wouldn't let me terminate my relationship because we had a hearing coming up in the near future, and I had to continue representing this client because it would have been to the client's detriment if he would have allowed me to withdraw at the time that he did. So in essence, I had to continue working without getting paid because of the timing issue of when is the best time to terminate services. And it always has to be in the best interest of the client or patient when we're looking at that. Additional ethical standards. These are the other kind of areas that they cover. Social responsibilities dealing with colleagues, with practice settings, with other professionals, with other social worker professionals, and with the broader society. So these are within those ethical standards. If you want to look those up, those are other chapters that cover a lot of the same things we've gone over, only dealing with these other groups of people. So training and management of assisted living. So this is an area where if you are an assisted living administrator, certain training that they have to have, a manager must have completed at least one educational course on the management of assisted living. It must have things in other areas, including dementia, resident assessment. So this is a kind of a broad definition under the Texas Administration Code of what assisted living professionals need to have. Counselors, licensed counselors are under the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics. Mission of them is to enhance the quality of life in society by promoting and developing professional counselors, advancing the profession, and using professional practices to promote human dignity and diversity. So again, as you see, as we're going through there, it's kind of the same theme throughout everybody that we talk, every area of practice that we talk about. Professional values are an important way of living out the ethical commitment. They enhancing human development, honoring diversity, promoting social justice. Does this sound familiar? We've heard this just a few slides back. Safeguarding the integrity of the counselor-client relationship, and practicing in a competent and ethical manner. Again, almost the same thing we've already talked about with the nurses, social workers, everybody else. Fundamental principles, autonomy, or fostering the right to control the direction of one life. Again, people have to have the ability to control their own life. We can't just tell them what they need to do or make them do things that they don't have input in. Non-malfeasance, or avoiding actions that cause harm. Beneficence, or working for the good of individuals and society by promoting mental health and well-being. Justice, fidelity, veracity. So these are the kind of 6 key words that they use in the Code of Ethics under the counseling, and what each one of them stand for. You all will get today. You all will get these slides, so I don't want to go through them. I don't believe in reading all these slides, but you will have this information to look at. The Texas Board of Examiners of Professional Counselors is dictated under, again, the Texas Administration Code. You'll find a lot of stuff under that administration code. Title 22 has a lot of these Code of Ethics areas in various professions. ethical dilemmas. Again, this is where I'm going to ask that you all kind of start chiming in. Certain ethical dilemmas that I've seen come up quite often is the question of how you ration resources fairly. That was a big issue when it came to COVID-19 issue of masks and gowns and the things that we need in respirators, ventilators. How do we resource those fairly? With treatment, we were talking about the ICUs, ventilators, and the staff. How do we make sure we have enough in area and who should get what? The purpose, if you are trying to save the severely sick, what are we trying to accomplish here? And I'm sure that some of you all have been in situations where they have been issues of care to the severely sick versus care to the not so severely sick, and who gets the most attention, and trying to save as many of the severely sick as you can. These have caused a lot of real big dilemmas in what is the best thing to do. So, you know, as I said at the very beginning, ethical issues should be when, let's just do the right thing. Well, it's not always that cut and dry. Doing the right thing is not just a yes or no answer sometimes. When it comes to people being sick versus, you know, who's entitled to the care, or who should we give the care to first when we're shorthanded, that's not always just a right thing to do answer.
There is one person that's got one example, I think, in the chat. And I don't know if you're wanting to address those now or you wanting to wait. And
sure, let's go ahead, Marty.
Go ahead. I'm gonna let I had a patient. I'm gonna let you read it. It's from Antoinette.
Let me see if I can find it.
It's close to the bottom. And then would you like me to open up the mic so people can share their ethical feels? I know there's a lot.
I have no problem with that at all.
Okay, so Rebecca and Cheryl and Esperanza, if you guys could just put in the chat yes or no, do you have an ethical example? I'll be happy to call on you if you do. And if somebody else has an example, go ahead and raise your hand and we will, but put in the chat that you do have that. I'd appreciate you keep it to your examples and keep the questions to the Q&A or the chat, if you would.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start, Marty, with that. Antoinette, I found that it said, I had a patient who had been a resident of a nursing home I worked at for several years. She had advanced directives indicating she did not want a feeding tube. I knew that this was very important to her because I had to review those. Let me see if I can scan down. I had to review those directives quarterly. It turns out she had a particular fear of feeding tubes and said she often had nightmares about them. Time passed and she suffered a severe stroke that had her unable to swallow and severely impaired. Her doctor documented the need for an MPOA, for her MPOA to make, and for those who that may not know, MPOA is medical power of attorney, her agent and her medical power of attorney, to now make medical decisions for her. Sadly, her son insisted on a feeding tube. We had a meeting with the son, a chaplain, the PCP, facility administrator, facility medical director, and a few of the nurses and aides who were assisted to her, and myself. We tried to help him understand that she did not want this, and he acknowledged her wishes, but said he could not let her die. Sadly, he won. She got the feeding tube. She fought it 24/7 and ended up passing due to complications directly related to the feeding tube. That is an extremely common ethical dilemma that we see a lot, is the conflict and the battle between the advanced directive and the agent under power of attorney. I honestly have been put in that position recently. My mom, who I've been caring for years, she is now in a skilled nursing facility, and I check on her daily. Probably won't get there today because of this, but she was at another nursing facility and choked. And they called me from the facility saying, your mom choked on some food. She's fine. We called the ambulance. They're taking her to the hospital. And so I get to the hospital. On my way to the hospital, the doctor calls me from the ER telling me that it's not good, that they can't find what is in her throat blocking her airway, that she's breathing through a straw when you're supposed to be breathing through a garden hose, and that she doesn't want a ventilator. She doesn't want them to put a tube down her throat to help her breathe, and asked me what I wanted them to do. And I flat out told them, it doesn't matter what I want to do, because my mom has already said this is what she wants. And not only did she say it verbally to them, which they need to honor, that is that she also had a directive. And so if I can already tell just by that conversation, if I would have said, oh no, I want to have a air tube put down her throat and I want you to do whatever, they would have probably honored my wishes over my mom's wishes. And this becomes an issue all of the time. And I don't have a good answer to how do we fix it, because there's really not an easy fix to something like this. What I tell my clients is that when we're doing documents, you need to appoint somebody who will carry out your wishes, not their wishes. And you need to have that hard conversation with them to say, this is what I want. This is what I'm putting in my directive, or in worst case scenarios, the do not resuscitate order, DNR order. And you need to honor that, or I'm not going to appoint you as my agent under medical power of attorney. Because the one thing that medical professionals are afraid of more than anything else is being sued. And who's going to sue them? The living person is going to sue them, not the person that's stuck on the feeding tube, that's had a stroke, that can't take care of herself. So I wish there was an easy answer to this, but there's really not to this one. This is one of the most difficult ethical dilemmas I think there is. And unfortunately, they always lean in the favor of doing what the healthy family member wants because of the fear of lawsuits.
Fred, we had another question that came up early on, and I think you're going to like this one too. It's from Anne McGlynn Sanchez. What can be done to change social workers being an employee of a nursing home? It is such a conflict of interest. Any map on how to make Congress change this? Social workers in nursing homes should not be obligated to the facility's self-interest. It never works out.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think there's a lot of occupations. I know we're talking about this specific one, but there's a lot of occupations, and there's legislation that has addressed that. And unfortunately, there's powerful PACs and other interest groups that have changed it. For many years, they had passed laws where doctors could not work directly for a hospital. They found a conflict of interest there. And now apparently that's happening again. I've not been in that area of law in many, many years, but I do know that is different. But it does take legislation. It does take interest groups or like the social worker organizations to fight to put forth legislation to change that. That's the only way you're going to get that changed. And it's a very, very difficult process. But I agree wholeheartedly that there is a big conflict of interest in that situation of caring for the patient versus I got to get a paycheck from this employer.
There's a comment on that too from Esperanza that she had received a referral for a family to be the service coordinator, and the family was a friend of hers. She talked to her supervisor and explained that she was their friend with this family and that there was a conflict of interest. The family was reassigned to another service coordinator. What would you comment about that?
Say that again, Sheila. Go over that a little bit.
Okay. Esperanza says that she had received a referral for a family to be their service coordinator, which is their care coordinator. And the family was a friend of hers. I talked to my supervisor and explained that I was a friend of this family and that there was a conflict of interest here. The family was reassigned to another service coordinator.
Well, I mean, what first, I guess I'm wondering what the conflict of interest was, because right off the just the fact that you know this person and their friends doesn't automatically set a conflict. I mean, it can, but it doesn't automatically. But that's probably the best way to handle that is if there's any type of potential conflict or perception of conflict, it's always better to bow out and request that the people be taken care of by somebody else. But again, that's a little bit different than the internal conflict we talked about earlier, is just the conflict of representing the patients versus working for the employer, and whose best interests are you looking out for? That's an innate conflict right from the start.
Okay, Amy says, my grandmother recently passed out. The paramedics were called. On her way to the hospital, her heart stopped and they used the defibrillator. My grandmother has a DNR, which was not available to the paramedics. It's hard to get it to where it stops right at the same time. Are you saying that if my uncle had been there, knowing full well she has a DNR, and he ignores it, it is null and void?
No, it's never null and void. Whether it's honored or not honored is the question. But I know that in first responders, unless they have something right there in front of them, unless they can, know for certain that there's a DNR in place, they are to do life-saving measures. And so that's not uncommon. And I don't think that is truly a violation of the DNR unless they are flat out know this is what this person wants. And typically it even goes beyond somebody telling them. I know that I've seen that even some people can get bracelets, that they wear a bracelet on that says exactly that they are not to be resuscitated and whatsoever. And if a first responder sees something like that, then they're to honor that. But that's kind of one of those gray areas to where you don't carry it with you all the time. They don't have it readily available, and they're going to take life-saving measures. They're going to, in the interest of caution, they would rather do life-saving measures than not.
Okay, this is from Beth. On the National Association of Social Workers Ethical Principles, what does the requirement to combat social injustice mean when applied to the recent letter about trans kids from the government and Attorney General?
Okay, I'm not familiar with this letter you're talking to, but I think just the beginning of that question, what does fighting social injustice mean? I don't know. I mean, that's an ever-moving target, and so what is considered social injustice today is different than what was considered social injustice 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So it is a constant moving issue of what is at the forefront right now. So there's certain social injustices that are pretty cut and dry, of course, but there's a lot of these areas right now, especially when it comes to what you're referring to, that is up in the air. And so I think that is one of those areas where you have to decide what you feel is the right thing to do and stand up for that. And I don't know how, I wish I could give you a more clear answer than that. I don't really have one, because that is one of those very, very wavering areas.
All right, Cheryl has a comment. I recently opened my own hospice agency in my hometown, and I was helping a distant relative admit his mother into a facility. However, I needed a contract to have my staff in the building. They refused to admit the patient under my hospice, saying it was a conflict of interest. I am a social worker who would not have been providing direct patient care, and I would have sent in another social worker I had to allow the family sign up with another hospice agency. I don't think this was fair. What do you think?
It doesn't sound right to me. I don't understand what their problem was. That doesn't make sense to me. Why they would just do a blanket conflict of interest decision on that. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand why they did that. I mean, we don't have time to really talk, but did you ask them, and what was their rationale for it? I don't know. But unfortunately, in a lot of those type of areas, their rules kind of govern. And if they have rules that say, we're not going to do this, and it doesn't make sense, they go with their rules anyway. And this is one of those that it sounds like they had a rule within the facility for some reason, or somebody made a decision on their own, and it doesn't sound like it's the right decision.
Well, Amy makes a comment on this, saying that you have to have a contract with any facility in order to provide hospice services. And I know that to be true from marketing and the marketing people that I know that have hospice. I know this.
Yeah.
So I guess that maybe that was the problem. I don't know.
I don't know either.
Okay, so Elizabeth also makes a good comment. Social workers have a hotline for ethics, such as these questions. Our code of ethics is very strict. Okay, that's good, Elizabeth. That's very good to let us know that. Okay, now I'm trying to see who.
And if anybody has information on that hotline, if you could provide that to us, that'd be great. I'd love to add a slide to this presentation with that information.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can you add that, please? That would be great. Okay, now let's see. I think I've caught up with the questions we have now.
I'll include that hotline in the email, follow-up email, if you'll send that to me as well. That would be great.
And Carolyn says, back to the hospice situation. And Carolyn, I've known this to be true. I've learned this to be true too. I am aware at some SNFs, which is a nursing home, not allowing any hospice to come in. They want to use their own people. Is it not the law that a person has a choice of a hospice?
Oh, it's definitely a law that they have a choice, but they don't. I mean, I don't know if they're breaking the law by not letting that happen. I mean, yes, if you have a choice to use your hospice, but you don't need to stay at this facility, that's kind of their attitude. Okay, if you want to choose your own hospice, you can go somewhere else. I don't know if they're breaking the law. I don't like that, what they're doing, but I don't know if they're breaking the law.
Our experience with my dad, who did have hospice for only a few days, as a matter of fact, only like 5 days because he passed. But they did where we were, and it was a SNF. They did in the area. They did give us, because my brother and I this was years ago, and we had no idea of who to use. And they gave us a long list. And we didn't know what to, and so the social worker involved with us said, well, a lot of people use this one. And that was the only direction we got. And the direction was fabulous because the hospice was wonderful but that was just a sort of it wasn't saying that they're the only ones they use or anything like that. I thought it was very fair. I thought it was very fair the way they did that. And it may not be true in all of these places. I'm sure that it isn't. But I also want to bring up something that happened to me with my son several years ago at a hospital here in the area. And this, you would think, would be so basic of an ethics situation. But I was on the elevator about to leave the hospital after visiting him. And there were nurses that got on the elevator from a different floor. And they were younger than me, but they were not, in their 20s. And they were laughing and talking about a patient and their family on that elevator. Now, I was appalled because how did they know that I wasn't a member of that family or that that was a friend? How did anyone know? How would anyone know that? So please don't let your people do this. And when you're training young ones, please remind them. I have no doubt that I have no doubt that that happens, that you want to laugh about the ridiculous things that go on in the room. I have no doubt about that. But you don't know who's in that elevator either. And that couldn't possibly have been right. Did I complain? No, I did not. But that has always stuck with me. That was like 3 or 4 years ago. And it's just stuck with me that why would they do that? Because that's dangerous. I could have gone to and complained, and I'm certain that none of you would let that happen on your watch, but just please train your young people when they come in not to do that, no matter what they feel like, to keep it to themselves. So anyway, just a thought. So, well, that's true, Joyce. Thank you very much. Okay, now let's see. Erin has a comment about hospice as well. Might be helpful to find a hospice who is willing to openly educate patients on specifics, but acknowledge not every hospice is for everybody. I'm sure that's very true. I'm sure that's very true. And the nursing facility, most of them do not have on-site hospice that I know of. So, and then Kelly says, I've always suggested family as the charge nurse, as they would have direct knowledge of hospice. Okay. Hold on. It's so hard to get this to get the right thing. Right, according to Medicare to, okay. All right, now I'm getting a better picture of this. I think is very sad because a hospice can provide more than staff in a nursing home. No kidding, Carolyn. To say no to any hospice, I believe, is against Medicare rules that the person is to be provided possibly money. Well, I don't know. Anyway, Fred, have we lost you?
Yeah, we've lost Fred somehow.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I was thinking, I didn't know if he'll, oh, here he comes. He's trying to get back on. We did have a little bit of a buffer issue when you were on, Sheila, that we lost his voice for just a minute.
Okay. But my internet went out too.
Oh, did it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I wasn't sure. Yeah, we lost you, and I didn't know if you'd got off on purpose. And I didn't know if it was me, if it was mine or on his end, but I lost his sound for just not too long, not very long at all. But
well, what I'd love to say is thank you, AT&T, when that happened.
Well, I think I'm back.
Great.
Yes.
I apologize. I just completely lost power, and it just shut everything down. So I've been trying to reboot it back up, and if you'll let me share the screen again, I think we're pretty much close to the end anyway of the slideshow, but
you go right ahead.
It's not letting me.
Okay, well, oh, because you just come on. I'm so sorry. That's me. Yeah. Hold on. You both come back on, so I'm not quite sure which one is which, but I'll get both of them here. I'm sorry. There you go. You should be able to do it now.
Okay, I think I can get it.
Yes, Carrie, hospice with her dad was a wonderful experience. It was with mine too. And to be quite honest with you, I told you we only had hospice for 5 days. I wish we had had longer than that. But we didn't know, actually, even though my dad was 94, we didn't know that he was passing. We didn't know that it was that severe until 5 days before he passed. But the hospice was so wonderful, and it was the hospice person, my contact, I guess you would say, my rep, who called me to say that my dad had passed that morning. and she was crying when she called. And it was just so lovely, our experience. I wrote them a glowing recommendation. I mean, it was just a wonderful experience. And that's why we, as a firm, we refer hospice to anybody, because it is just, you know, it just helps the family so much. So anyway. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, I was looking through the slides, and a lot of these slides right here are dealing with the testing and vaccines of COVID vaccines. Some of that has been ratified with more supply, but we're even seeing that still today as things are getting better, thank goodness, but we're still seeing people having trouble getting the testing, and you know, where should these tests go? Vaccines are more readily available. I haven't heard the problems with vaccines like we did. I have seen it though, even in my mom's community, and some of you all might chime in and tell me what you guys are seeing on that. But I found that I was trying to get my mom the booster for COVID in her last community, and they didn't have it. They just weren't getting them in. And I almost was to the point of taking her out of the facility on my own, so I could take her to an outside source to make sure she could get that booster shot, because the communities, they kept telling me, well, we're waiting on them, we're waiting on them, we're waiting on them, and we weren't getting them. Then she got diagnosed with COVID. They isolated her for over a week. She had no symptoms whatsoever, thank goodness. But the whole way that they handled it, I was very unhappy with the entire way it was all handled. So some of you all, if there's some things like that you could share with us of how you're seeing these communities and how they're handling people that test positive, or how they're handling vaccines, or how they're handling testing, please chime in. While we're doing that though, I'm gonna go on to the American Medical Association has a journal of ethics. It says, certain difficult decisions lie ahead that raise potential challenges, such as rationalizing and limiting healthcare resources. We've talked a little bit about it. It's who gets what when you don't have enough supply. Imposing restrictions to individual movements and liberties. We've seen issues like that of being quarantined and not being able to see loved ones or go into things. And so there's been a lot of issues dealing with our movement and our liberties over the last 2 years, and upholding professional duty to treat in the face of personal danger. I don't hear that as much today, but we would hear that for a while of, okay, wait a minute, I know I've got to take care of these COVID patients, but what about me? What about me subjecting myself to the possibility, and then my family to it, and that dilemma of, who should I look out for, my patients or me? And so that these are ongoing issues that are going to continue in the years to come. So the ethical case studies, we've kind of been going through things, so I'm going to skip over that. Of course, I've got to do this on my wonderful legal disclaimer. I'll let you guys read that.
So, Cheryl, oh, hold on, I've got to do this on this. I'm sorry. Cheryl has her hand up, and so I'm going to. There's 3 people that have their hand up, and I'm going to go ahead and call on them real quick. But you got to give me just a second. I've got to get to the right screen. Cheryl, I've unmuted you. Did you have something you wanted to share? Cheryl Landheiser?
She might need to unmute herself.
Okay, she may need so yeah, Cheryl, you may need to unmute yourself. Esperanza, I've unmuted you, and Rebecca, I have unmuted you, but you will have to allow yourself to talk. I mean, I'm sorry, you will have to unmute yourself to talk, but either Cheryl Esperanza or Rebecca Moore. Oh, go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you. I've got 2 puppies in case they start barking. I worked for a facility whose director of nurses was married to the medical director. Now, let me tell you, two people made the real decisions on these patients. That was the director of nurses and her husband. So you couldn't present anything that went against what the doctor said because you offended the nurse. That was her husband. So 3 people were in charge on all decisions: the administrator who hired them, the doctor, and his wife. And it was a nightmare. I don't know how this was allowed by the state, but it sure created a lot of unethical things on top of all the unethical things that occur in nursing home settings.
Well, and that's you're kind of addressing one of those areas where there's not a lot of regulation and rules that come out of the government when it deals with nepotism like that. And nepotism is, hiring family members in different positions. So that is one of those areas that is allowed to be, for lack of a better term, abused, because there's not guidelines that direct it. They leave that up to the facilities. Now, to me, a good facility should have nepotism laws or rules in place for their own facility to prevent that type of thing. But apparently this one didn't want to. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. That is an innate conflict, and it is a horrible position to put the employees in, and it's not for the benefit of the patients by any means.
Well, when you were speaking of the hospices, the hospice that was always, quote unquote, chosen for the facility, the medical director would be a medical director with that hospice.
Boy, that's horrible.
Yeah.
That's what we call self-dealing. It's doing things that benefit you, not the patient, not the client. And there are laws dealing with that, but they're real hard to show, and they're real hard to enforce. And it takes somebody to actually step forward and file a lawsuit or something. And that's a difficult place to be. That's terrible.
Thank you.
Esperanza, did you have something else that you wanted to say?
Well, I have a question. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So going back to that example that somebody gave about this lady not wanting the feeding tube, and then the father and the son wanted the feeding tube, and then he ended up winning, okay, even though it was not the mother's or grandmother's will. So my question is, so even if you have a power of attorney or the statutory durable power of attorney or advanced medical directive, all that, even if somebody decides, well, I don't want to be in the feeding tube, or I don't want to be on the ventilator or something like that, even though is that done with an attorney, formally done with an attorney and signed and everything, can somebody in the family fight?
Okay, there's almost a innate conflict between an advanced medical directive and a medical power of attorney, or a potential conflict between those two documents. Those are both two legal documents done by legal professional attorneys, but there are laws in place that allow medical facilities and hospitals to disregard a advanced directive if they don't feel that it's in the best interest of the patient or whatever, which I disagree with. I don't like it, but it gives them some discretion in honoring that directive. And we've had issues come up where a directive said to not keep me alive, and the hospital decided they still want to keep this person alive, and the family was on board with what mom wanted. Mom didn't want to be kept alive, but the hospital went against them, and their only choice at that point was to move mom to a different hospital that would honor their wishes. And that's what they did. They ended up transferring mom to another hospital who would honor that advanced directive and allow mom to die naturally. The potential conflict between the directive and the medical power of attorney is that I have said, okay, this is what I want. I don't want to be kept alive, but I've also appointed somebody to make medical decision and medical treatment decisions for me if I can't make them for myself. So if I can't make them for myself, then I appoint, let's say, my daughter, and my daughter comes in and says, yeah, I understand that dad said he didn't want to be kept alive, but that's not what I want, and I'm the agent, or I don't really think that's what dad meant in this situation. So now you've got already a potential conflict that you've already established. And that's why I said earlier, one of the conversations I have with my clients is you have to appoint somebody and you have to have discussions with that person so that they will do what you want them to do. And that's one of those discussions that my mom and I have had. And I think part of it is, of course, because I'm an attorney that does this. And we've had those discussions. Mom, what exactly do you want? And, you know, if this situation comes up and that situation comes up, what do you want me to decide? Because I know as an attorney that even though my mom's DNR says certain things, they're going to still come to me before they honor that DNR. And so that becomes an issue. And unfortunately, it's a problem that there's not cut and dry laws that say one rules over the other and the medical facility has to honor something. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Fred, Stacy has a question.
Okay.
What to do when the next of kin is under the influence and there is no other family and patient is not able to make their own decisions?
Hey,
Well, the reality is a medical facility should not be listening to a person that is under the influence because they're not of the right mindset to be able to make the proper decisions. They're voluntarily incapacitated, and so they should not be listened to. So again, the medical facility and all needs to bring that forth and say, hey, you know, we've got a person that is appointed to make these decisions. That person is not mentally capable of doing it because of an intoxication or whatever. And if you've done your documents right, the documents always should list alternates. So they should list, okay, this is my primary person I want to make my decisions. This is second, this is third. And so a medical facility say, okay, we've got a drunk son here who I don't trust making right decisions. Therefore, we're going to go to daughter because she's number 2 on the list. And let's talk to her.
But in that case, as she was bringing up, there was no other family. So
yeah,
you know, that's a real problem. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the law would fall back on if you don't have anybody mentally competent to make right decisions, the decision goes back on the healthcare provider to make the decisions.
Okay. Joyce has a comment that the hospitals fight transfers these days. It's not easy to arrange anymore because of what you said. That, yeah.
I was gonna say, I wonder why. It's all about money. We are in a horrible situation, I think, in the healthcare industry, and there's so much revolving around money that it affects the care of people. I won't get on my soapbox, but I think there's some serious problems in the healthcare arena.
Elizabeth has a comment that you're going to really like, Fred. She says that COVID also made DNRs complicated because of the need for temporary intubation.
Yes. Okay, and that's I've gotten that question before, so thank you for bringing that up because it's reminding me that when you have an advanced directive, a lot of people during this time when there was so much uncertainty, people would say, well, I don't want my advanced directive to say I don't want any care, and then they can put me on intubation and save me, and now they're not going to put me on intubation because my directive says I don't want that. And the reality is that should not be an issue, because the hospitals are allowed to do any medical means possible to save your life. That what an advanced directive does, and that's what's different from an advanced directive and a do not resuscitate order. A do not resuscitate order, if written properly, it says don't touch me. I don't want any means whatsoever to save me, period. An advanced directive says, I want you to do everything in your power to save me, do everything in your power to make me well. But if all that has been exhausted, if you've tried everything that you can try and now it's either keep me alive or let me go, that's when the advanced directive kicks in. So temporary intubation, when a medical facility thinks they can do that to save the person, they're allowed to do that, and that is not a violation of the directive, because they're allowed to do any measures possible to save life or to promote life. They're not to do anything just to extend life.
Well, and I know that we've had this problem in our office because I was called as a witness one time for someone to sign their documents. And of course, witnesses are not supposed to say anything unless they, other than hello and, you know, whatever. But the lady, when we got to the advanced directive, the man filled it out and the son was sitting there. And the lady says, I'm not signing this. She says, no. And so the attorney that was sitting there explained to her what this was, the life-saving measures, that what it would be to keep you on life support. She said, I don't care. I've seen this on TV. I know what. And then you realize she was talking about intubation and ventilation. She thought, just what Fred said, she thought in her mind that that's what they were talking about. And then everyone tried, even everyone was talking at that point, trying to tell her, to assuage her, to say that, no, this is just after the doctor agrees there's no hope, there's no brain activity, blah, blah, blah. She wasn't having any of that. But the sad thing is what happened next. And that is that the son, Fred, you weren't in there, but the son looked at me and said, can I override that? And I said, sir, I'm just a marketer. I really can't say. And the attorney was kind of horrified because they didn't know what to say. And so, Fred, I didn't know what to say either. What should we have said at that point?
Well, the attorney needs to be honest with everybody, and the family needs to know that, yes, you can override that. If you're going to appoint this son as the medical power of attorney, that son can override what the directive says, and most likely the medical people will listen to it, listen to the son.
Okay.
Every time and I've had that come up in signings and stuff, my attitude is I'm going to be blatantly honest with you, and I'm going to tell you this is what the law says, but this is reality. And the reality says that the medical professionals are going to let this son make that decision because they don't want to be sued by the son if things go wrong.
Okay. Anyone else?
Wow. Very, very good.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred. Thank you so much. Let's leave your contact information up there for just a minute. And then we'll go ahead and review the CEUs and that kind of thing one more time. And then, and again, there will be a follow-up email coming out to you all that will have the links to these slides and the links to the case studies that that they sent us. Thank you all so very much. But if we can advance it now one more time, and Sheila, if you go over the CEUs with them again, that would be great.
Real quick before I do, I just noticed on this slide that the telephone number that we have on here goes through a call center that we use. So Sheila is going to send you all a direct line, a phone number that comes straight to our office. If anybody has any questions, you can get right to us.
That's great.
Yes, because we don't want you to have to wait to go through this call center. So no. We'll be happy to do that. I didn't even notice that until, thank you, Fred, for noticing that. So, okay, once again, and several of you have already reached out to me, which is great. So once again, here's what you do. You either reach out to me directly at Sheila@Haiman+Hogue.com, or you wait for Marty to send you the paperwork to fill out yourself, which is an eval form and a sign-in sheet. Now, the code of conflict of interest is for you to keep, just for your records. But the other two, I will need signed and returned back to me, and then I will send you a certificate.